My name is Dr. Anjali Fober-Pratt, and in addition to having transverse myelitis since 1984 when I was a baby, so been using wheelchair for 35 years, I am also an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University and on the board for the association. I was asked to come and share some wisdom with you all, both from my personal experience as well as kind of my role with the organization. As you see, I also have service dog Colton, who gets very offended if I don't introduce him. Some lenses that I bring to the table, and I was just talking more about education across the hall. I was involved in a federal lawsuit against my school district as a teenager, and in terms of discrimination on the basis of disability. I travel a lot, probably about once a week. I'm on airplanes, both domestically as well as internationally, so I have a lot of expertise in relation to that, and just kind of lived experience. So I think I'll leave that there in terms of my intro and pass the mic.
I've got Mike.
You have them. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
we have three.
we're three. I'm Sandy Hannebrink. I also have transverse myelitis for 32 years. So I'm older than her. I'm also an occupational therapist, and I'm an ADA consultant and a former Social Security Administration employee. I was involved with writing the Americans with Disabilities Act as an intern, as a newly new advocate, newly ordained person with a disability back in the day. And like I said, I've worked in school systems as a school system OT. I've worked for the federal government, and then I work with contractors and hotels. Apparently I have a new contract with this hotel now, to bring things into compliance or to, from the very beginning, design things more accessible and inclusive. So I work with a number of disability laws, not just ADA and 504 and the things that are in IDEA, which many people are familiar with because of schools and that, but also Civil Rights Act, Air Carrier Act, and we have new legislation that is on the list that is being proposed for disaster preparedness so that we ensure that we don't get left out during that. I also travel a lot. I'm in chair number 4, compliments of the airlines, from it being flown somewhere else to being run over. Airplanes win. And somehow the manufacturers don't hold up their lifetime warranty on the frame when an airplane runs over your chair. So I have a lot of background and stuff, and kind of my practice niche is networking people to the services that they need, understanding how to write your disability application so you don't have to wait, helping people understand about durational denials, like if you're too new and haven't been disabled long enough, don't apply yet. There is such thing as too early. And then just any other resources. So that's kind of what I do. I also am the executive director of Touch the Future, which is an assistive technology and ADA consulting and training nonprofit, and we help people get toys, anything they need to be accessible and independent. So that's kind of my thing in a short. Both of us are Paralympians. I still, 20-something years later, have 3 world records and 4 American records. Pretty proud of that. So anything about being back in, we also train service dogs and things like that. So whatever questions you guys have, we're here for you, not just today, but ongoing. It used to be, I'm the other Sandy, because I'd answer the phone and they'd go, you don't sound like the man I talked to. And I'd say, I'm the other Sandy. So that's who I am, and I'm happy to be here and provide you guys some support.
Hello, I'm Catherine Treadaway, Chapman. I work at UT Southwestern Medical Center. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for over 20 years now, and 17 of those years have been at the MS clinic at UT Southwestern, and also working at Children's for the last 10 years. So I would say my main role has been connecting people to resources, working with them on work accommodation letters, helping them with their disability process, and just anything to advocate for them. So just a lot of experience with that, and just counseling people. And so we kind of all together put together this list of all these resources for you to look over, and we were kind of discuss all those, but we thought if y'all had some specific questions to start out with, that we would do that. And we already have one out there.
Here's
The question was, what are we Paralympians,
Paralympians
in?
in.
So I was I am a Paralympian in the sport of wheelchair racing. So I competed in Beijing and London in the sprint. So I did the 100, 200, 400, 800, and relays, and got 2 bronze medals in Beijing.
And I didn't like to run before I was disabled, and I still don't. So I do field events, so shot put, discus, javelin, but I also in swimming. And then I did beat the guys back in the day in the quad A wheelchair tennis for the U.S. Open. So, and then they say, why don't you go do see women? And I'm like, because I can make money and beat you. But yeah, so I've been involved in a number of sports and starting programs. My organization is also a Paralympic sports club. So, but we primarily do experience opportunities. We don't have like what we call ongoing program, but kind of introducing wheelchair sports and Paralympic sports to the community. And I do a lot with kayaking right now. So.
Nice.
And we always say once an Olympian or Paralympian, always one. So. No, what I do.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. So she asked if I help with disability applications specific to a state, and the answer to that is no. What I typically do is get online and either do shared screen with you and review it, or people give me their password, and I'll log in and see what they have written, and I say, don't submit it. And then I'll go in and tweak it so that it has the right buzzwords, or I'll ask more questions like, do you have these issues, do you have that? Because what happens is when people do their disability applications, they talk about their best day or only a diagnosis. They don't talk about the whole system, and it's your whole person that they're looking at, and it doesn't matter if, you also have arthritis in your left knee, and you have depression, you've had anxiety, you've had, you have pain, you don't, whatever, spasticity, whatever. They just give, like if you just put down NMO or transverse myelitis, that reviewer may or may not even understand that. So you actually have to say the symptoms you have too with it, and then how it impacts you, because then it gets processed a whole lot easier. And then I can tell you too more about what documents want to provide them, because if you provide them enough of your medical records without all the confusing misdiagnosis stuff, you don't have to give them every doctor you've been to, just the ones that matter. So I'll look through some of that too, because if you give them enough information at the time of application, they won't go get more. So what happens is people list every doctor they've been to, including the ones that gave you a wrong diagnosis, and then they go, oh, they said that it's psychiatric or it's, whatever, and then it gets kicked because there's medical record that on that. So there is an art to it, especially with rare conditions.
Mm-hmm. And something that's really important is to go to your doctor and see them and talk about the difficulties you're having, because they're going to be looking at your medical record. They don't want the opinions. They want just the facts in the record. And your NP, PAs, they are acceptable medical sources. So we have an NP in our clinic that's kind of specializes, like if someone's considering disability, they go see her, and
NP
she's
is nurse
practitioner. Nurse practitioner
or
physician assistant. They are considered credible medical sources,
as well as your occupational therapist and physical therapist. But your primary care doctor, if they haven't documented that you're having problems with depression, you're having neuropathic pain, that you're struggling with even doing regular household chores, getting bathed and dressed and going to the grocery store, you need them to put that in the record, because the medical record is the only record and it's the only evidence that's considered. So if it's not in there, that's when they start sending you to Social Security doctors who are like Joe Blow, people who apparently aren't really good doctors because they have time to go see everybody. That's their business. they are not going to have a clue about what we have.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a 15-minute visit, I think, too.
If that.
Yeah. But yeah, and even if you're just making an appointment just to go discuss the difficulties you're having at work, and then to brainstorm about how you can keep working. And a lot of these resources are resources in your guide about how to continue work.
Or go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you were a child when you were diagnosed, resources so that you can get the training and financial support to go to training or college or help get a van or, all those things.
Yeah, and one thing, and then we'll come to you, kind of on that note, and all of these resources are phenomenal, but one just to point out, on the vein of accommodations and work and so forth, is the Job Accommodations Network, and that's one of my favorite websites, because you're able to actually, they've got a really cool drop-down list where you can say, either by type of condition that you have, or by like what your symptom. Say that again. Sorry.
By limitation.
By limitation.
So what you're limited from doing, is it cognitive processing? Is it fine motor? Is it lifting, walking, whatever? You can look by your limitation as well.
And they have a really cool front-facing side if you're the employer and you're trying to figure out how best to accommodate an employee who might have XYZ condition. And so I think, because sometimes, especially for somebody like myself who's grown up with my disability, I often, I didn't even know what to ask for in terms of that type of accommodation in order to make that job more accessible for me, because it's fundamentally different when you're just thinking about classroom accommodations versus then being able to do the things that are necessary for my job. So myself, I found that website to be tremendously helpful.
It's a wonderful website, and they actually have sample letters on there that your doctors can use, and you can call them and talk to them, and they are so helpful. Yeah. And
the other on there is the ADA National Network. If you call the 800 number, it's going to send you to the network that your phone number is coming from. So if you happen to live in New York and now you live in South Carolina, but your cell phone's New York, it's probably going to send you to the New York one. Just telling you that little thing. But and it's fine, because they all have resources, and they can help the employer as well. But even the Department of Justice and the EEOC, you can call them for technical support. Most people think if you're calling them, someone's going to get in trouble. Their number one job is to provide technical support, and these are all free services. Or you can call us, and we'll hook you up. I know Job Accommodation Network, I wrote a textbook, I think it was in 1997, for occupational therapy, for effectively educating and employing individuals with disabilities. So looking at how to, not just classroom accommodations, but for your internships and that, which is still given out by the Job Accommodations Network and the ADA centers, because it hadn't been updated. But with the ADA Amendments Act, the rules have changed. And so even people who have kind of a relapsing remitting, so like with some people with NMO, they get better, but then they could have another episode. In the past, they wouldn't have been covered necessarily under ADA if they fully recovered, or recovered to the point where it was mitigated. But now, under the new ADA Amendments Act, they're still covered. So that happens a lot with people with MS. So there's a lot of resources and stuff to be available. But one thing I always tell people is everything's not ADA. That kind of gets lumped into, like, this is, it could be 504, Rehab Act of 1973, Section 504, which anybody that receives federal dollars has to have equal access to their facilities and their programs and services for people with disabilities, and that's been since 1973. That was a precursor to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under ADA, they have to provide, depending on if it's a government program or a private-owned program, the test for how much access they have to provide is different. Whether they have 15 or more employees, 50 or more employees, what they have to provide is different. So understanding what your rights are and using this guide is important, so that you're using the correct terminology is a big step in being a good self-advocate, because everybody automatically says, well, ADA is this. They say that for airlines all the time. And other than the airport, and the restaurants and stuff in the airport, that might be ADA, but most of it's the Air Carrier Accessibility Act, and which we've put the hotline on. I have it on speed dial, so if you're in the airport and they're not doing what you need to do, you can actually call them and the FAA answers. And then you go, hold on, and you hand them the phone, or just put on speaker. It works. So it's understanding, just like on housing. People, the Fair Housing Act's under attack right now, so knowing that Congress is trying to weaken the law and put the pressure on you so that you have to prove you need grab bars in your apartment or your rental house. So under Fair Housing Act, there's protections as well for what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, or what you have to do at your cost versus the landlord's cost, and that. So it's important to understand the laws so that you can self-advocate.
And I know we had a question here.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to know is where I work at has a counselor on staff to help for whenever you have a problem, it's whatever problem. Can those be documented, my visits to them?
Yes.
Documented as part of disability?
Yes.
So the question was having a counselor at your place of work and going to that counselor, can those types of visits be documented in terms of the part of disability?
Yes.
I just want to say something real quick about the ADA and just how awesome they are. So I have a contact at the Southwest region, and anytime I have a question that comes up in clinic, like I had a lady that she needed to get out of her office lease because she could not continue to work full time, and she had met with some attorneys who said there is no way you're getting out of this lease. And I got with the ADA, and this guy Diego, yeah, he's amazing. And so he sent me this huge email about how she could get out of that lease and why and what title it was under. And he said, you can just copy this and give it to her, and she can bring it to the landlord. And I was like, thank you so much, because
so
I did not know that would be possible.
Right,
so.
and the same thing with changing your lease to allow for ramps and stuff, or getting a ramp put on where they said, no, you can't put a ramp on because the homeowners association said this, or the city review board says you can't do this because it will change, you have to take out bushes, or the tree police won't let you cut down a tree. But under a modification of policies and procedures, that is covered under the ADA or the Fair Housing Act. So there are ways, there's a lot built in to the legislation.
Be persistent.
But a lot of it is be persistent, but you have to have the facts. You can't just assume it's there.
Question, I'm relatively stages to the left here. In a handful of years, I'd like to retire slightly south, please. And so Ashley has Medicare, but also has Medicaid. But I remember all the fun we had after Ashley's now set up, getting the benefits set up. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, move down to Florida. No idea. Is there any advice you give that anything in advance to do before you actually land where you're going, to start to go through the gauntlet when moving to a new state and trying to get into the state program?
Absolutely. So first is
And just to kind of paraphrase the question, so the question is so currently Ashley is receiving Medicare and Medicaid in the state of Indiana, and thinking ahead to potentially moving states. Is there any advice in terms of thinking proactively about that?
right. So a lot of it is you have to look. Every state is different. So Medicare is Social Security, disability, or because your parents are receiving, or you've worked enough and you're insured. Medicaid is needs-based, and that is state to state is very different. Some states, I think Mississippi has, don't go there if you're an adult. They don't have, I mean, it's really horrible. Yeah, Mississippi, if you're an adult, you don't want Medicaid. They have great child benefits, but their benefits for adults, I mean, excuse my language, but it sucks. So understanding what the Medicaid is, which states have Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, which states have waiver programs that would include potentially transverse myelitis, or some of the others with where you have paralysis involved under their spinal cord injury waivers, and head and spinal cord injury waivers. People who have have cognitive deficits will fall under their head injury waiver programs or not, because if you have Medicaid waiver, you have more services. The other is understanding how long do you have to live there before you're eligible to receive those services. Some of them are 2 years now. So you could have a gap. So I have families that I know they still live in their old state and their family establishes and they list that they're living there. I'm not telling you to do anything illegal. But they're still back and forth. So some states, if you're at least 6 months in a state, and then, so the snowbirds are 6 months in New York in the summer and 6 months in Florida in the winter, they can still establish a co-residency. Some states allow that, some don't. So understanding what Medicaid programs are available, what vocational rehabilitation programs, Voc Rehab is not the same in every state. And the links are there.
MedicaidWaiver.org.
Independent living centers, you can go through the National Council on Independent Living. They can give you a list of the different independent living centers in each state. So you can look at what city you're looking to move to and talk to them. They are usually very proficient in what benefits and services are available in their communities. The National Council on Independent Living, the link's up here. If you go to that site, it will take you to the independent living centers in each state.
And oftentimes, although this is going to vary state to state, but oftentimes they also, at these centers for independent living, they often have disability advocates who are very well versed in terms of a lot of these laws and policies, as well as state specific resources and just the insight and knowledge in terms of how to navigate these systems, because we know we're throwing at you all sorts of differences in terms of, oh, well, for this it's this and for this it's that, and a lot of that it really does take building that relationship with folks on the ground.
30
yeah
something years
exactly
each experience doing this, so don't think you're going to remember all this now. We just are kind of throwing out as much as we can and trying to answer any specific questions you have, but we're still available, so don't think you have to remember all this.
And this MedicaidWaiver.org will tell you what programs are available in that state and whether there's a waiting list. So like Texas is like thousands and thousands of people on the wait list. But in Oregon, there's not a waiting list because we have looked at that.
And depending on which waiver program in South Carolina, there's huge waiting lists. But then we also have a category of called community long-term care. So people can get on that and get attendant care services and things like that they need while they're on the list. And then some they don't have a waiting list, but they just say, well, we do in order of your number, you get benefits. So there's things like that. Some Voc Rehabs have that too. People who have the most likelihood of succeeding get services, and everybody else is on the wait list. So once they've used their state budget, then you have to wait till next year.
Sandy, can you talk a little bit about the types of services that Voc Rehab can provide? Because I don't think everybody understands what Voc Rehab is and so forth.
So the Vocational Rehabilitation Department, their whole focus is anyone over 16, and it can be by law as early as 14 if requested, but most won't even talk to you until at least you're 16. They're going to start working with individuals in high school to help transition to college, training, or work. People who are out of high school, us adults who become disabled, Voc Rehab is going to help you either keep a job or to get the training and skills that you need to get a job. They may actually work with your employer to help determine what accommodations are necessary. They usually have a budget limit on how much per year that they'll pay. Again, each state is different. In South Carolina, they'll pay for up to 8 semesters unless your vocational goal is you want to be a lawyer. Well, you can't be a lawyer with a bachelor's degree, right? Or you can't be an occupational therapist. They won't pay for an OTD unless that's the only program offered in the state, but they will pay for the master's in OT because that's the entry level. But for a physical therapist, you have to be a DPT, a doctor, a physical therapy doctorate. So if that's your goal, don't say, well, I think I would like to do this. Don't let them say, well, you could be a physical therapy assistant and then go back to school later, because that means they only want to pay for 2 years of training, because they always try to get the short, cheap way out. Or somebody like when I first became paralyzed, I was in school to be a pilot. And so Voc Rehab told me I could be a travel agent. Yeah, that didn't work for me. So yeah, that's the same thing, right? So think ego of a pilot, and then travel agent. And I was like, okay, I just won't work, because, and I spiraled down because of that, because I thought my life is over, right? And then because of rehab and that, and then being like a peer support person through like wheelchair sports and things like that. And that's kind of how I got back out to, it was about what I could do. And then it was like, oh, I could do this. And then I couldn't figure out how I could be a PT, so I switched to OT. But even then, it took me 8 years of fighting systems because there was no ADA yet. And so I had to prove that I could be, I'm like, wait, I'm helping people do rehab that you can't get to do rehab, but I can't be an OT, kind of thing. And so it was like fighting that system. So learning how to self-advocate for myself became my career. Kind of thing, and that's what you guys can do, but it's because I learned the laws and was introduced to them through independent living, through wheelchair sports, through whatever. So questions? I know you got disability questions, because that's what the number one calls I get from TMA. They're having trouble getting this as Social Security. How do we do Medicare?
There's a question over here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was 13 when I first got transverse myelitis. I was paraplegic. I was in a wheelchair for a year and a half, and then I used a walker. And then I walked independently after that. So I first ever applied for disability when I was 18, maybe early 19, right out of high school. And then I swear I got it for like a month, and then it went away, and I got denied. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I didn't get it. And then I remember calling, and I said, well, can I apply again? And I remember trying to apply, and then we even went to like a disability lawyer, and I went to a doctor and everything, and because nothing ever was wrong with my arms or upper body, they were like, oh, well, you can still work, like you can sit at a desk. And I'm like, I'm 18, like where I'm supposed to work at like McDonald's, like how I'm not gonna find a desk job right now in my life.
Right.
Now I'm 25, and I'm a nanny, so that actually works out well for me because I'm not like doing too much heavy lifting because they're not that big yet. So like, yeah, so I just don't know if I should ever try to apply again because even the lawyer said you're never gonna get it. Like if you have upper body strength.
Yeah, that's not necessary.
I'm
So,
like, I can work at a desk, but it's just.
so what Social Security looks at is based on your past job experience, based on your disability, and whether or not your disability is going to either end in death or last at least a year. Is there a job readily available in the national economy that you can do? Okay, so at 18, you probably haven't had much work experience, right? No. What probably happened in your case is your doctors were documenting you were improving. You were in a wheelchair and now you're walking. And so depending on how you wrote everything up is why you probably were denied.
Because I don't even go to a doctor now. Like I don't know any. Like,
So there is.
Therapist anymore at all. So.
Right, because there's no medical record, there's no information for them to make a determination on. They see you as cured because you no longer go to doctors.
I can't stand for more than 5 minutes. How many? Like I can't have like multiple jobs that that would accommodate me.
Right.
All the time. Like,
So what I'm telling you is you have to go to the doctor so that they can document, because if there's no medical evidence, there's no way they legally can make a determination.
well, what kind of doctor? Like my family doctor? 'Cause I don't
Family
see any
doctor,
anymore. Okay.
neurologist, whatever. But yeah, so you have to have medical evidence in order, and that doctor has to be willing to say that you're disabled to the point that you can't work.
Yeah.
And if your doctors don't document that, then the people making the determination can't say you can't work if your own doctors won't say you
Yeah,
can't.
'cause I remember when I went and saw a doctor, and it wasn't obviously a doctor I'd ever seen before, and he was doing all the tests on like my upper body, and he's like, okay, push. And I'm like, okay, like nothing's wrong with my upper body. And then of course when he was doing, lower body strength tests, and he could see how weak I was, and he's like, well, you can still, sit at a desk. And I'm like, okay, it's just difficult because it's not easy to find a job that always works with what's available.
Right.
Especially when I'm
Well, and if the bottom line is if you have paralysis to the point where you can't walk a sustained distance, if you can't do steps without fear of falling, there is no job readily available in the national economy, because even though we have ADA, you still can't get in. So if you have paralysis at all, even if it's incomplete paralysis, that's an automatic, you should be approved.
Yeah, that applies to me because my right foot is still
So if you can't do steps, and your doctor documents you can't do steps without fear of falling, and things like that, then typically you can get approved. And again, it has to be in the medical record.
Mhm.
A neurologist, but even a primary doctor
But
can
it
do
was
it.
when I was, like a teenager, so he saw me until I was like.
Even those records still count, but if that doctor can take, if you have those records or can get them and get those to your current primary doctor, even your OBGYN can read that and say this is still the case and document it. It's a doctor. As long as they got DO or MD behind their name, or nurse practitioner or physician assistant behind their name, it's a primary medical record that can be considered.
I just don't go to a doctor for transient myelitis anymore.
But it's, remember, Social Security's looking at the whole person.
Yeah. I was just going to mention, have you met with a vocational rehab counselor? Because oftentimes they're under disability determination services, so they can do, work with you, see what skills you might have, might try to help you find something you can do.
Well, I enjoy being a nanny right now, but I'm like, I'm not going to want to do that forever. So it's just, I'm trying to.
Well, it's the free
Well, they'll help you go to
service,
college
vocational rehab
and whatever.
counselors.
Yeah.
I went to school. I just didn't finish right now. But I went to school to be a teacher, and then there was other things that happened.
But they could help you go back to that goal if that's your goal. If you decided that wasn't your goal, go talk to Voc Rehab. The whole point is you really don't want to be on Social Security disability unless you have to be, because you can make a whole lot more money and have a whole lot better life, if you have more
Working,
money than
yeah.
having to jump through the hoops of trying to stay under a certain dollar amount. Like, you don't want to have to try to live on $1,200 a month. And I mean,
Yeah, you can make way more the salary. It's a huge cut on disability benefits.
and you're very restricted on what you can do. But I mean, if you have to be, you have to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with it, because it's what I say. It's a hand up. It's not a hand out. And you've either paid into the system or you're on SSI and you haven't worked enough to have paid in the system. But if you were disabled before the age of 22, the other thing that's important is if you do get on disability and your parents become eligible for Social Security, then you can draw on their record too. So because you're considered a disabled adult child, and so those of you who were disabled before, if you weren't before 22, and you're only getting SSI because you weren't able to work, once your parents are drawing, then you can also receive on their record, which gives you a Social Security benefit and Medicare, so you're not as restricted on physicians and stuff as only going to a Medicaid provider. Yes?
So, I'm on Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
Can I apply for Medicaid?
Medicaid is needs-based, so it depends on your state and how much your income level is, whether or not you would get Medicaid. So most people who are getting a Social Security check are making, whatever dollar amount, are probably going to be over
the amount, yeah.
Yeah, because your assets and stuff. Usually a house and one car are exempt in most states. I think there are 4 states that's not the case. But in Social Security for SSI, as well as most states for Medicaid, your house and one car are exempt. But if you have 2 cars, that's going to put you over the resource limit.
Is disability and Medicaid the same thing?
No. Social Security disability is disability insurance that you pay FICA tax out of all your paycheck. That big chunk of money comes out. That's your premium for Medicare and to pay into the Social Security system. And that's where the money goes to the trust funds, and that's what pays for you become insured, okay? SSI, Supplemental Security Income, is a federal needs-based program that some people get both because their Social Security check is still so low that they're eligible also for SSI. But the people who just get SSI means they didn't pay in enough to be insured for Social Security disability benefit, and their income and resources is below the level to be eligible. With SSI, if you get at least $1 of SSI, that in all states that have Medicaid adult Medicaid programs, that entitles you to Medicaid. Some people don't get Social Security or SSI, especially with kids, because their family makes too much money, so they're not eligible for SSI, but they can still get Medicaid under the child Medicaid programs. In our state, it's called TEFRA. In some states, it's called Katie Beckett. And it's based on the child's income and resources, not the parent, not the family. So you can be a millionaire and have a child with a disability that's eligible for Medicaid.
Something new in all of this process we found out, if you go to an elder care attorney, they can help you with trust, like if you have disabled children, help disabled you. It's a trust that protects your money for them, take care of them after you go no longer here.
Right.
But there's a lot of monies that do go in there to protect it.
Correct.
Yes.
So with a special needs trust is what she's referring to. You can do that as an adult, not just for children. So you could have your Social Security check go through your trust, and that can make you eligible for Medicaid in some states. But what's important to understand is when you die, the state gets to go after whatever's left in the trust and your estate first to recoup any money they've paid from that point forward on, and the states do. Amazing, they can do that application fast. So they can get that. They get that back, and your family wouldn't. So if, like for me, I'm single, so a special needs trust would be really good for me if I ended up needing attendant care because I got sick or whatever and needed an attendant. I could change all my stuff to go in trust, because if the state recoups everything, you know, yeah, I'd like to give my family or my roommate or whatever what I have left, but doesn't really. I don't have children that I'm trying to leave for. But people who have children don't want their house to go to the state. You know, they want their family to have it. But special needs trusts are very valuable. Also, if you're working age, there's the PASS plan, which is a plan to achieve self-support. Like, say you're going to go to work and you need a van with a lift that's $70,000, you can put a plan to achieve self-support in, and you can still keep your benefit checks coming in even though you're making a good salary until you raise whatever that PASS plan is to modify your home to get a van or whatever so that you can work. And so you'll still keep getting your checks, and you'll live off your checks so that you can set aside your salary to pay for the van or the home modification or whatever it is. So there's a lot of different programs that are there for you.
Right. You don't want to leave all your savings to your child that has a disability, because it will knock them out any Medicaid waiver program that they might be eligible for in the future.
Right. So like with my organization, we help people fundraise for to get assistive technology they need. And so we have two ways. You can set up a crowdfunding platform, which counts as unearned taxable income, and it will knock you out of Medicaid and
Yes.
SSI eligibility, and it's taxable. Or we do we can, depending on the case, set up a dedicated account for someone, and donations come in, we provide the tax receipt, and then we pay the vendor. But if there's any money left, it can only be used to get assistive technology. We can't give cash to someone because the IRS calls that laundering, and I'm not going to jail for anyone. So there's two different ways of doing things, but these crowdfunding platform stuff are taxable, and it knocks people out of benefits all the time because you become overpaid.
It happened to one of our patients. It was for like a dental procedure. She had raised money, and then it ended up kicking her off her Medicaid. It was a big, mess, but she did get back on it, but it took months.
Yeah. Questions. Come on, I know you got them. Yes.
My husband got approved for Social Security. He was under the age to go on Medicare, so he has to be on that for 2 years. Will they contact him, or does he?
It automatic. Yeah. And the reason for that is it's stupid. But the reason for the 2-year waiting period is because when the law was written, it was required by employers to have 18 months of short-term disability. And so there's always a 6-month waiting period for Social Security disability before cash benefits kick in, and then which is where you can COBRA. And then you had 18 months where you had short-term disability. Well, now you can COBRA for 18 months if you can afford it at $900 a month. And then Medicare kicks in. And so the law hasn't changed, and that's something we have to advocate for. But that's why the waiting period. Unless you have ALS, that's one that did get changed to where if you have ALS, it kicks in immediately.
And stage renal disease too.
Yeah, end-stage renal disease, right.
But yeah, I wish they would get rid of that rule. 'Cause
Yeah.
that is really
End-stage
difficult.
renal
End
disease.
stage renal disease is another
And the
one
reason
that's
is
approved right
people
away.
with either one of those typically didn't make it 2 years, and somebody in Congress had an aunt that had that condition, and that's how it got changed. But that's how easy it is, though, is if you can get your Congress member to put forth something, they attach it and it happens.
Yeah.
So. The other thing in employment that I forgot to put up there is state and federal government agencies have federal hiring authorities, so you get preferential hiring. So if you're looking for a job, federal is a good gig because all you have to do is work for them for a month. And if something happens where you had say you have NMO and you had a big flare and you couldn't work, your benefits continue. It's the best health care out there is the federal health benefits. They're going to post this so you have the link. So this will be on the transverse myelitis. And I have some more here. Because I was the one that was slack and thought I emailed it and didn't. They told me to save one. I just print them at work.
Do you want to just raise your hand if you didn't get one?
Anyone, other questions?
So, I have a question. My son, he turns 18 in 10 months, so he doesn't qualify for SSI under RNDS, but should he apply like day one he turns 18?
The month that he is going to be 18, call to make the appointment because that's what's called protective status. Because with Social Security, you have to be eligible the entire month. So, so if he's not 18 on the 1st, if he is on the 1st, then you're good. Go ahead and do it on the 1st. But the month that they're going to be 18 is the month you want to do it. If you do it before, the month before, that's fine. But nothing can happen until he's 18 anyway. So.
And they, like, that's good to apply for that while they're in college or something, right?
Yeah, as soon as he's 18, yeah, because under SSI they have what's called an A living arrangement and a B. A B is you live with your parents and somebody's helping to pay for your support, so it's a smaller dollar amount, but it's almost $400 a month, so it's good spending money for college. And then A living arrangement means that you can pay your fair share. So if there's 5 people in your house and your mortgage is X and your bills and utility bills and things like that are this, and 1/5 of that, an SSI check could cover it, and you say at 18, we need him to pay rent, and he pays his fair share, he can get the A living arrangement. Yeah. There are tricks to the trade. Questions?
Any other questions? What time are we ending? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think we're over.
I think
Okay.
we're over, but that's okay.
Well, and just grab one of us if you
Yeah.
see us and want to ask us a question outside of this too. And thank y'all so much for coming to our session.